Welcome, everybody, to Weaving Corridors, Tejiendo Corredores, a bilingual podcast that explores the question, what if we create, grow, weave nature-culture corridors of planetary solidarity? What if we promote ecological connectivity and resilience in every ecosystem, from the micro to the macrocosm, through gestures and practices of care for the earth and all of its beings, all of its cycles, 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 cycles. Hello and welcome to another episode of Tejiendo Corredores, Weaving Corridors. I am Ela Spalding, and today I have the joy of speaking with my dear friend, Yasmine Ostendorf-Rodríguez. Just briefly before we get into it, I will tell you a little bit more about Jasmine. Jasmine is the founder and director of the Green Art Lab Alliance, established in 2012. A network comprising 60 art organizations across Europe, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Asia. The mission of the Alliance is to foster relationships that contribute to social and environmental justice, akin to the interconnected nature of mycelium. She also founded and directed the Nature Research Department at the Jan van Eyck Academie, the Van Eyck Food Lab in 2018, and the Future Materials Bank in 2020. She is also a self-proclaimed mycophile interested in exploring the application of a mycological lens in defining fair models of collaboration and self-organization. Her debut book, Let's Become Fungal, Mycelium Teachings and the Arts, shares 12 teachings of the world of fungi, and it was published by Balice and is currently being translated into various languages. Well, it has been translated into Spanish, and was selected as one of the best Dutch book designs 2024 and nominated for the best book design globally in 2024. We met because of GALA, and I'd heard
Yes.
of you beforehand because of your work, and you're like a true networker, and not only networker, but articulator of networks. And I've seen the process of you falling in love with El Mundo Funga, El Reino Funga, and producing this book and making all of these things happen, and how the book is touring around the world and all the workshops and things. So it's just been so nice to follow that journey. And in particular, it's just nice to have you here on the podcast because I feel like GALA has inspired me in so many ways, being a member of the Green Art Lab Alliance through Estudio Nuoso. And it's an example, a living example of this notion that I'm exploring, or we explore on the podcast, which is to weave nature culture corridors of planetary solidarity. And GALA is an alliance that for me exemplifies that. It's just a joy to have you on the show.
Likewise. So happy. I was trying to remember actually how many years we know each other now, because I think it was in the time when we were both kind of loosely associated with Center for Contemporary Art in the Natural World. No?
Yes, with Clive Adams.
Exactly. So that must have been, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago.
10 years ago, I think, yeah, we were both associate curators
Uh-huh. Yeah.
for that center, but I don't think we met later in Berlin, and I was either pregnant or had a baby, my first baby. So 2016, 17.
Yeah.
Almost 10 years.
I know. This is sort of like our 10-year anniversary.
So many 10-year anniversaries.
Uh-huh.
Looping in and out. Yeah, I just wonder if we can just chat a little bit about GALA and what your experience has been growing it from Europe to Latin America, Asia first, and then Latin America, and now North America.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because throughout these 12 years, I think I mean, I'm quoting here, but the only constant thing was change. So it has taken so many different shapes and forms, and not only in in these different localities and geographies, but also politically, where we are in different moments in time, and how the alliance has always just adapted to what was rather than the other way around, no? Than that the alliance had like a solid form. And so that growth has also been very organic for that reason. The aim was never growth, and the aim was never productivity. It's more we awaken when there is a need, when there is a desire, when there is an ask, when there when allies kind of raise their hands and like, I need this. So that growth has not been this kind of imperial kind of taking over the world kind of growth, but first of all, extremely slow.
Mm.
It's been 12 years, but also um based on where there was a lot of need from partners, and also um just where I've been putting my energy myself too. No, so in 2015 I moved to Taiwan and was in Asia for 2 years, between 15 and 17. And so a lot of the activity also took place in Asia in those years. And when I moved to Brazil in 2019, organizations were saying like, oh, the alliance should have a presence here. And that opened up also a lot of different questions about the identity of the alliance, the profile of the alliance. So yeah, it's been a constant shape shifting of who we are and what we are, and I think that's also the one thing that um, helps to keep it relevant and alive for so many years.
Could you describe to the listeners what GALA is, or who the partners are? Like what we have in
Yes.
common?
Yes. Actually, you mentioned 60 organizations, but including the American and Canadian partners, we're now 80 organizations, which is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 80 arts organizations. I think that's one thing that they all have in common. They're arts organizations. And secondly, all of them are working with environmental issues in one way or another. So whether that's collaborating with climate scientists, more in the domain of science, or climate collapse, or more based on thinking about territory, thinking about food, thinking about protests and activism, land use, land rights. Everyone has a kind of their own lens of looking at what it means to operate at this intersection of art and ecology. But it is something that they all have in common. So their methodologies might differ, but the goal is essentially the same. No, and the to make it also very concrete, we have about this, a manifesto, a collectively
Mm.
written manifesto, where we also literally express what we have in common with each other, and to understand that we have a mutual goal. No, we are not competitors, we are collaborators. We are moving in that same direction, and to move towards that direction, it is helpful if we do that together and if we movement in that. So I think that is also an important part of that mindset, is not just, oh, we're an arts organization working with ecology, but it's also recognizing that that other organization is not your competitor, but that in order to be stronger, you need to be collaborating with them. And that's also not per se something that all arts organizations, I think, are aware of.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
also
we all.
differ really,
Mm,
sorry, they also really differ in like in size, no? So
yeah.
some organizations, are a collective of 5 women, and others are real institutions with a lot more resources. Some are, in huge cities, others in the jungle, in the countryside. Some are residencies and also farms. So yeah, there is a lot of diversity, but the goal and that kind of mindset is really aligned.
Yeah, I mean, in our experience with Estudio also being a really small organization, we met a number of other organizations. There's a previous episode with Fundación Mar Adentro,
Yes.
and who I met Maya because of GALA and in working groups, because we organized then, just for the listeners to know, we organized sometimes around themes that we were all interested in. So driven by common interests, then we organically found collaborations or conversations or mutual support simply in being organizations that work in this field, which is we're kind of all creating the path as we go. It's not like
Yeah.
there's a
We're a movement.
history. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Movement. Yeah.
And and as we speak in that conversation, like Manadentro is much larger. They have a very large reserve, and they have a space in Santiago de Chile, and things that I would aspire to be with Estudio Nuovo kind of thing.
Yeah.
That there's a mutual admiration and kinship, and there's a beauty in that. And I feel that the fact that we're all ecological organizations, or at least tuned into ecology, leads
Yeah.
us all to be more symbiotic rather than competitive. Like we're all follow Lynn Margulis rather than other views of life.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. And I think there is also a beauty in that diversity because, I mean, to give a very concrete example, like something really at the beginning when we started the alliance, one of the key partners was Julie's Bicycle in London. So they were really pioneers in understanding how climate is a cultural issue, what the role of cultural organizations is or should be, but also then why cultural organizations should be looking at their own footprint, environmental footprint, and having like amazing methodologies and knowledge and tools on how you can look at your water waste, energy mobility, etc. And so they were really pioneering, but very UK focused also. No, so that kind of it, that knowledge couldn't really travel outside of the UK. And by being part of the alliance, they started giving a workshop with our partners in Georgia and in Tbilisi, and they realized like, wow, all this knowledge that we have about, I don't know, measuring your carbon footprint actually is not super relevant in their context, but what we can learn from them is their incredible resourcefulness and creativity in how they are managing the residency, with actually so little resources. So I think to have this diversity in profiles really helps big organizations to learn from small organizations and the other way around, but also European organizations to learn from Asian organizations or Latin American organizations, and also the other way around. No, because we, a big part, I think, of breaking out of um, this kind of rigid ideas about how we can just become climate neutral or sustainable is actually understanding that the context for an organization, on the other side of the world is completely different. And it's not one size fits all when it comes to policy and making changes. And there is also a little bit of, danger of eco-colonialism in that, no? Where you can say, where you would find, uh, mostly European policies saying, oh no, but those you cannot fly anymore. It's like, well, for an island. Or
Yeah.
so it's I think there's a lot of teachings there also in what a European discourse can learn from islands, or from tropical climates, or when we're talking about conservation and saying, oh no, but we have to have the air conditioning so and so, otherwise you can't look after this artwork that's actually from your own culture, but that we actually stole so many years ago. It's like, well, yeah, if you are in extreme humidity, what does that mean for conservation of artwork? And so all these questions about archiving, about ownership, about temperatures, about humidity, but what sustainability actually means for in different parts of the world, I think is like a abundance of knowledge that's been, for me, like one of the biggest inspirations in being part of the Alliance.
And I think that's where the planetary consciousness comes, where you can be very local in what you're
Exactly.
doing, but also aware of the planetary connections, implications, differences, interconnectedness, all those aspects where and also not feeling not alone, but it brings you to that point of,
Absolutely. Oh, yes, that's one of the things that I hear all the time from the partners. It's just like, oh, it's so good to know that there's 79 other organizations
yeah,
having same fights
yeah,
and the same frustrations with bureaucracies, or with their governments, or knowing that you're
yeah,
not in that struggle is huge.
yeah, yeah. Especially now when we feel that a lot of the bad news is kind of taking over, and
Absolutely.
having this kind of like underground network to go to is
Yeah.
invaluable.
Yeah.
I want to get to the underground network, but before, I just want to ask you, the invitation of the Nature Culture Corridor is to towards various types of actors or agents in the world, but towards cultural institutions, the invitation is to go beyond representation of ecological topics and towards action, things that actually make a difference, and not just talk about it or show it. And in the back, you have the AC super high and you do all these things that are actually totally unsustainable. Um, or fly all over the place when you could actually do it slightly different, and so on. So I just wanted to ask you, I mean, you mentioned a few things, but do you have any concrete examples of partners or collaborations between partners that have had a real impact on land and or on a community more specifically or concretely?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty much only that type of work, because we're actually really bad at the showing, the kind of even keeping up with all the stuff that's happening. And I think, I mean, it's good and bad, because in one way it means that we're really bad at showing impact, or even
Mm,
understanding what is the impact, and communicating impact. But at the same time, I mean, I'm also not too worried about it, because it also means that we're not actually wasting too much time on communicating and I don't know, measuring kind of, oh, this is everything that we're doing, but it's all just kind of happening all of the time.
mm,
And it's also because I am not in between all of those things anymore. It used to be a little bit more like that, but I've also been working on trying to uh not be like the center of the alliance, but really to for everyone to know each other, so that it doesn't go actually through me. So a million things that are happening, I usually find out like a year later. And it's like, okay, you guys met each other because of the alliance and then did a project together. And now, this new organization is there, or now this funding is there. Or so I think a lot of it, again, is that invisibility, also happens just kind of organically without per se measuring or showcasing, like communicating what's happening. And I'm trying to think of a very concrete example. This is an example that I've mentioned a couple of times just because I think it's so powerful, but it's already a few years ago. I'm sure there's more, but is making connections with pro bono environmental lawyers, for instance. No, so through connections in the network, some organizations have been able to protect themselves from court cases, from quite serious problems, because they had this kind of international shelter uh,
Mm.
of connections. And I think specifically in a world where in some parts of the world activism is actually, a pretty dangerous endeavor,
Yes.
where it can literally cost you your life. I think this is like a very real impact to be able to make people more safe by offering them either relationships to lawyers, or residencies where they can stay for a while so that they are out of their contact, or their regular context, let's say.
Yeah.
So here I think impact is a huge thing, because it's like whether you are safe or not
Yeah.
and you can continue doing what you're doing or not. So yeah, I'm more interested in that kind of impact than in audience numbers kind of impact.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes
Well, as
sense.
that is what we are trained to think in when we have to write about the impact of our project, is like, how many people came to this performance? Is like, is that really the only way that we can measure the importance of things? Like, I feel like there's so much unlearning to do there.
Floating down a pearl river, it seems like we are all moving together, but elephants are flying backwards in the sky. I see elephants are flying backwards in the sky. One day, one day, one day. Yeah, no, I mean, I like what you said about Julie's bicycle and how cultural institutions can be more, or every institution, but like through culture, you can start to propagate the practice or the gesture of measuring your carbon footprint, of taking different steps and doing different things as to have a certain cohesiveness in the way that you're not just
And
paying lip
accountability.
service, but you're actually
Exactly.
accountability. You're actually doing what you're walking the talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of
Yeah.
course, this type of example, the way in which the alliance works with this solidarity in its part of its nature, let's say, that it's working together. We're trying to help each other out,
Yeah.
knowing that we're part of this big movement that's happening, popping up in different parts of the globe, and that we can, yeah, support each other along the way. It makes me think of the lessons, the way that you structured your book on Let's Become Fungal. And perhaps, well, I'd like to ask you if there were lessons that you got from the mycelium, but also perhaps from GALA, or if there's a correlation to that experience.
They are completely entangled.
Mm,
No, and I would have never even come to mycelium if it wasn't already for the alliance, no? Because it
mm,
already like hands deep in just system design and networks and support structures, symbiotic support structures, mutual exchange or reciprocity, like all of these topics have been extremely important in my work. Um, and so for me the book was a kind of excuse also maybe to start researching that and making that translation from the work with the alliance that I had been doing to yeah to what that looks like in nature.
mm,
And the process for that was just interviewing a lot of interesting people, including yourself, that were working also in these ways with these topics. Um, and the teachings really came from them, no? So I was asking more all these questions, and then I didn't want to have like literal answers to the question because that's kind of impossible, and it's also it's just not that simple. But through these stories and through all these conversations, I distilled these 12 teachings that you can implement in your life, and that uh I get a lot of also responses from people that are saying like, "Oh yeah, I'm really organizing my life in a different way now, and that's thanks to the book, or it really changed something in how I relate to this or that." And so that for me is yeah, kind of, I don't know, a dream? A dream. A dream to hear that it is something that you can apply to your own life, and it is a real methodology in the sense that it's not just for one person, but you can upscale, you can apply it in an organization, in a community, within your group of friends, within a professional collaboration. It's very it's for everyone. It's not mine. And this I
mm.
really like.
Could you mention the 12 teachings?
Oh my God, by heart?
Or a
Well,
few, a few.
yeah. No, one is how to rethink death, decay, and decomposition.
Well,
Because fungi are essentially decomposers of the world, so they form a really useful and interesting gateway into talking about transition of energy. That we don't just think in terms of ends, also not for our organizations or for, even systems, no, thinking about capitalism or modernity. It's more like, how can that transform into something else without it being the end of humanity? So
yeah.
it's not per se just about um, the death of an individual, but also what good endings and the transformation of energy into a new system could look like, thinking from the perspective of mushrooms, because that's what they essentially do. No, they take a dead matter and they decompose that, and it becomes soil again, and from the soil sprouts that seed again. So that is one. Another one is how to organize like mycelium. So working across disciplinaries, boundaries, and not think of, oh, this is the end of this is one country, so that's where we stop, or
Yeah.
a different discipline, and so that's where we stop. So really this kind of, uh, interdisciplinary, cross-border way of working. Another one is how to understand the closeness of toxicity, resisting the teaching is to how to resist the demand for purity.
Yeah.
No, how, because we have learned also, or many people have learned, to associate mushrooms with toxicity and danger and disease. And that's also very correct in many ways, because they do also appear in our lives where we don't want them or how we don't want them. But I write also about why this is the case, that we associate them with toxicity, but that I think is a whole kind of other story. But the idea of, how we can understand that in our lives is also, um, yeah, not not desiring to go back to, or there is no going back
Yeah.
to, like a state of purity or an original state of nature or wilderness. So there are also very romantic ideas that it's kind of also a minefield, because they're all traps for racism, for instance, and for um just also an obsession with hygiene, or like there's all sorts of uh or the Virgin Mary, oh, that's purity. There's a lot of narrative around there that you can use in very problematic ways, while as we start from the point of toxicity, accepting, that yes, we are, even with every breath that we take, there is shit in what we are breathing, what we are eating, what we are drinking, the systems that we are in, the stuff that we buy. Like, if we can start accepting that that is our starting point, I
Mhm.
think that's a really helpful way of thinking about where we're going, rather than going back to this illusion
Yeah.
of purity, rather than going, I mean, this is all going back to the capitalist ruins of Anat Singh. This is going back
Also,
against purity, Alexis Shotwell. This is going back to hospicing modernity,
yeah.
um, um, Machado de Oliveira. It's all like understanding where we're at and where we can go from there, instead of this idea of an original state of purity.
In one of our encounters around these topics, I remember talking about it in terms of like the messages that uh,
Uh-huh.
can come when, let's not necessarily say like a deadly mushroom that you eat, but like maybe in your body, an excess of certain fungi, or in a house, there's a message behind it. And if you stay closed and you're like, I have to eliminate this thing,
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
instead of going into a relationship, perhaps of understanding the cause and effect and the reasons behind why this thing is here and what
Yeah.
message is it telling me and why is it behaving this way. I mean, I don't know, it just made me think a lot about relationships and even like why a relationship turns toxic in itself. It can also be because there is a discomfort or there is something going on,
Yeah.
um, that if you can address or if you just stop and listen to the other and to yourself, perhaps the
Uh-huh.
toxicity also can dissolve. Like there's a lot of things. It makes me think a lot about otherness.
Yeah. And then you can understand also what your next steps might be. One thing that's so amazing about fungi is that they're incredible. You call them bioindicators.
Yeah.
No, so they say so much about their environment, about temperature, about humidity, about toxicity. Based on lichen, for instance, it's a sign that actually the air is quite clean if you see lichen. Or if you have black fungus in your bathroom, it's a sign that it's very humid.
Mm.
Or when there is a fungus on a certain tree, it says that that tree might already be dead and might be decomposing. So there is a lot of things that they are signaling,
Yeah.
that we can learn about what's happening in that environment. So rather than going, oh my God, there's black fungus, I need to get the most toxic spray that I can find in the supermarket and kill it. It's like, well, maybe I need to do something about the ventilation
Yeah.
in the bathroom, because also it will come back if we don't look at the roots of the problem. And I think, yeah, I mean, that's also something that we've just learned to think about what is the quick solution rather than what is the root of the problem. And fungi can really message and show us and tell us what is the root of the problem.
I think that um, or a lot of the work that happens in art and ecology organizations or individuals that live, breathe, and produce culture around that is a lot about listening and being
Yes.
in relationship and learning to read the messages that our environment is giving us, which in our anthropocentric world, capitalist world with this control lens of us controlling the environment and making it serve us, um, it has led us into a certain way of being in the world. And I find of such value or the value that I find, like you were saying before, like with esto universo, like I would find it hard to measure exactly what kind of
Uh-huh.
effect we've had, in
Yeah.
our community. But I can assure that one of the effects that we've had is having a different way of being in the world and creating spaces where it's possible to be in relationship with each other and with the environment in a different way. And that's so important, especially nowadays when there's just so much detachment, so much separation and isolation and
Yeah.
deepening of relationships with technology rather than with humans or let alone the environment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so just bringing these teachings and these lessons back again to the broader scope of what we were speaking about in the beginning with GALA and on
Mm.
the global, in the globe. If we were to draw a map of where these organizations are, and the type of mycelial relationships that have formed around there, what would it look like for you if you could just imagine it now? How could you imagine it?
Well, I'll be very honest. I think the first thing that would be very apparent is that Africa is missing, the African continent.
Mhm.
And I think that is uh, a real weakness of the alliance, that there is not many relationships. And that's also something, that I dream of, to have more allies and more partners and more exchange with arts organizations working with environmental issues in the African continent, because there are many, but I haven't spent much time there myself. I mean, I was in Tanzania for a while, but that's also like quite a long time ago. So I think that would be the first thing that actually you will see when you make all these connections, is like, oh,
Yeah.
there is a lot of them, but they are not there. Why? Um, but looking at the other connections and relations, I think you'll see a really nice diversity in terms of, that it's not only organizations that are in big cities. I think that's quite important, no? That you really have actual organizations in the Amazon and in very rural Italy, or on a Caribbean island, or so. I think you would see that it's not about the so-called art centers,
Mm.
that as we know them, just as, I don't know, in New York, London, Paris, or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think those two would be like very clear observations if you would make that map. I would love to see that map, actually.
I would just be so curious about how many of the organizations are in or close to natural corridors in their
Yeah,
regions,
yeah.
and just
Could
play
be really
around.
research that. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
play around with the potential connections of weaving those corridors, or how this actually is already
Yeah.
this idea or an image of a nature culture corridor, because they are cultural organizations working with aspects of nature
Yeah.
and care of the
Yeah.
environment. And so,
Maybe.
yeah, I think it could be really beautiful and very dynamic, and just kind of, when you're designing, or when young people that are, don't yet have children or are free to just choose where they can travel, they could also like design a way to connect through these partners.
Sounds incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be really beautiful. No, and also maybe it's good to mention that all these partner organizations, they are like the official partners, because there's been long-standing relationships, so like years of dating, basically, then making it official. um because there is a very clear need for them to be a formal partner. But besides these official partners, there is a lot of other conversation also happening, also dating happening, with organizations that either want to be a formal partner, or there's no need to be a formal partner, but they are still allies, and we are still in touch, or they still come to Gala Fest, or they distribute the calls, or that are some that are definitely
Allies
still
of the
allies.
alliance. Yeah.
Yes, yes, but just not formal partners. And I think also it's not necessary for all partners to be formal partners, because many of them are really focused on their locality, on their community. So there isn't this direct desire to connect with the rest of the world when they are
Mm,
really in that space, unless something happens and that's needed, and then we will rethink that situation again. But it's not this kind of you're in or you're out kind of alliance
right.
in that sense.
Where can listeners find more information about GALA?
www.greenartlaballiance.com.
And social media?
Yeah, also not terribly active on social media, to be honest.
Very good.
No, I think you know what is actually the best way would be to find out who is the GALA partner in your country. And through that organization, you'll have like a much clearer picture of what the alliance can do for an organization, because they will have their own experiences and their own stories, which will be really different per organization. And because there is hardly any cold contacting because of this issue of trust, no, and protection. Um, it really is in that sense, yeah, through existing relationships, you will meet other people, they will introduce you again, and then it will grow. So yeah, what you'll find online, what you'll find on social media is very limited, for several reasons. But if you can find a living person, a contact point, that knows someone, I think that is like a really nice way of understanding how this beast, how this organism behaves and functions.
Yeah, lovely. Well, just lastly, thank you so much for your time, Jasmine. It's so always a pleasure to see
Me
you.
too. It's a real pleasure.
There's so much more to talk about, but we're
I
gonna
know,
leave this
we could talk
episode.
for hours.
We're gonna leave this episode at this lovely introduction to this
Yeah.
work, and perhaps we'll have another occasion again.
Yes, to be continued.
Have a lovely afternoon in Mexico, and I'm signing off from Mallorca. Take care, my dear.
Take care.
Ciao. Thank you for listening to Weaving Corridors, Tejiendo Corredores. You can follow us on www.estudionuboso.org or elaspalding.com or wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. If you like what you heard today, do share, and let's keep weaving.